Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Metroid. The last part we started off the game and made our way through Brinstar, eventually ending up here in Norfair. And now we're going to explore a decent chunk of this area. Norfair, in terms of like pure condensed size and amount of rooms, I believe is actually the largest area in the game. Brinstar is larger on a scale-wise because it's a lot wider. But I believe this place has the most rooms in it, and also the most items. In fact, out of the, and I'm going to get a rough estimate here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30-ish items in the game. About half of them are here, and that's just in terms of energy tanks and missile tanks. Also, we got another missile tank there a few seconds ago. As you saw, that increased my total up to 9. That's because every missile tank increases your stock by 5. There's a total of 22 or so of them in the game. And obviously, we're going to be finding them all. A lot of the extra pathways in Norfair actually just lead to more missile tanks, too. Thankfully, later Metroid games handled missile tanks a lot better in my eyes, where they were not only hidden a bit better, but they also weren't just rewards at the end of a pathway. They were often, very often honestly, especially like Super Metroid, hidden in rooms you had to go through anyway. Though in this game's case, we just have to go around a lot. Thankfully though, I've actually managed to make this LP shorter than I originally thought I was going to, because this is actually technically a combination of what was recordings 2 and 3. Because the thing is with recording this game is that I'm actually, like I mentioned about towards the end of the last part, I'm going to be doing jump cuts in this game every now and then, and doing those actually saves a surprising amount of time. Because this 20-minute part was the culmination of 2 30-minute parts in terms of recording. Every now and then you will have to use the Rippers, by the way, like that. Although those are technically Ripper 2s, I believe, as platforms, so keep in mind for that. The Ice Beam is very useful here. In fact, the Ice Beam allows me to get a couple items over here a bit earlier than intentioned. Also, now I'm going to cut back to the elevator room. That's basically the kind of jump cut I'm talking about. Usually only 1 or 2 rooms away. 9 times out of 10 at least. But it's also in here that we have one of my least favorite enemies in the game. I believe they're the Garudas. The thing I just blew up. They are very annoying, the fact that with the Ice Beam they take a lot of hits to take out. One missile can thankfully kill them after 1 Ice Beam. But they are very hard to avoid. Thankfully, that's the only really annoying enemy in this area. Though we also have the Squeeped here, which is one of the weirdest enemy names I've probably ever heard. Sounds like the mating call for some other kind of creature. Squeeped! In terms of stage design, though, Norfair, similarly to Brinstar, revolves around a major shaft that we're actually going to be coming to at the end of this hallway. And get used to seeing that shaft's tile set, because Metroid 1 is very guilty of copy and pasting certain level design assets. Mostly because there's only about maybe 7 or 8 different tile sets. So get used to that. Also, you can bomb this floor. That's one thing I gotta give Metroid 2 onwards even more credit for, is that they made bombable walls like that just a bit more obvious. But that was the point of this game, to explore a lot and try everything. Either way, we have another upgrade room coming up, and in here is technically our last mobility upgrade, and it's a pretty handy one because it basically allows us to access the rest of the game. You know, it's always been one of the hardest things to do about older Metroid games, though, in terms of me playing them. The missile doors. 5 missiles is weird to me. I'm a 1 missile guy because I started with 0 mission. And in here we get the high jump boots. As its name would imply, it allows us to jump higher. I think roughly somewhere between 1.5 to 2 times the height was before. So now we can access basically anything else in the game. And also gives us a bit more leeway with dodging some attacks. Now that we're back in the shaft, though, we feasibly could head down and access one of the later areas, actually, but I want to have a lot more missiles before I head down to that area. So that's going to be waiting for a bit. So let's head on back towards the first area we were in, but skip the door we came through. We actually want to go through this lower door first, which I actually recommend waiting on until a bit later in the part to tackle if you're new to the game. Because this is one of the hardest rooms in the game in terms of enemy layouts, because we got Novas and a lot of Garubas, and just a lot of annoying platforming, because as I mentioned before, enemies at this point, with my 30 health, could probably do about a third of that with 1 touch, so I need to be careful with how I let these things touch me, if I let them touch me at all. Metroid 1 is a hard game, I will always say that, but I will give it this. I don't think it's as hard as Zelda 1. I think this game's actually a lot more accessible than Zelda 1 because the map's a lot smaller, and it's a lot harder to get lost in comparison. Plus, when you die, you don't get sent back to the first screen much. The way Metroid 1 handles its game overs, if I recall correctly, is that if you hit retry, I believe it starts you at the start of the area you were in. So if I got a game over here in Norfair, I'd start at the elevator room from Brinstar. Or it also could very well be just the last elevator room you were in, but I would think it's the one that enters the area. So if I died in Brinstar, I'm sent back to the first screen of the game. Otherwise, I'm over here. In terms of the password system, I'm going to be going into more of the interesting passwords later on. But an interesting thing about it is that there's actually a way for you to get your password without having to die. You need to press, I think it's start on controller 1 on the NES, and up and A on controller 2 on the NES at the exact same time, and that'll end your game and give you the password that you have. So that's pretty cool. Though in terms of mechanics, on a similar note, that are technically glitches that I'm not taking advantage of, there's one in particular that's known as the morph ball jump. Essentially, if I were to say, like, this platform I'm about to jump on right now, if I were to be on a morph ball and fall off of it, I could unroll from my morph ball by pressing up. Samus would be in midair, but she would still technically be counted as having floor beneath it for some reason, and I could jump again in midair. So, that's there. That can actually be pretty handy for if you want to do some small amount of sequence breaking, but I'm not going to do it, because Metroid 1 doesn't actually have that much sequence breaking you can possibly do. Because it's actually fairly open-ended as to how you can attempt things. The only thing you need to get another item is morph ball bombs and the high jump boots. There is technically a way to skip having the high jump boots for something, but I'll go into that when we are doing that later this part. Either way, now I'm back in the purple shaft because I'm not going to go all the way back to that room because all that was at the end of it was more missile tanks. Kind of funny how almost insignificant missile tanks feel in this game, though, because there's only 22 of them, which means you get, I think, a total of 100 or so missiles from them, which is over half the game's supply. Well, technically over 30 because there's a total of 255 in this game. But you might be wondering, well, then where's the other 150 come from? You'll see eventually. Either way, the interesting thing about Norfair, and I'm not going to be showing it off, is that up in this upper part of the first half of the purple shaft, there are, I think, 4 doors total. Let me take a look at the map I have on standby. 5 doors. We went through the first door a few moments ago to get to those 2 missile tanks in that really long and annoying hallway. The second door leads back to the elevator. The third door leads to the thing I'm not doing, and then I'm going through the 4th and 5th doors right now to get a total of 5 missile tanks between the 2 of them. What's in the third, the third door is actually another upgrade room that leads to a second ice beam. The reason there's a second ice beam is that, technically speaking, the one that is in there is the one you're supposed to find first. It's just that the other one's there for another developmental reason that we'll get into in the final parts. But I decided to go for the one that's in Brinstar because it's much more in my way, honestly, is the way it is. Plus, I find the ice beam to be more useful than the long beam in the long run. Also, I absolutely love Norfair's musical track. I said it last part that Metroid's soundtrack is just really good. But it bears repeating because there's a lot of good songs in here. Their remixes in later games are better, i.e. Zero Mission's entire soundtrack. But goddamn, they did a good job with this game's soundtrack. The password system's a bit interesting, though, in that it's actually very easy to abuse because there's ways you could potentially give yourself a dead game with it. There are a few passwords that are considered like Uber passwords that give you a lot of stuff, but the main password for some reason I immediately think of, there's one that's like 12 threes followed by 12 capital Ks, and that takes you to the title screen, weirdly enough. And then there's the infamous glitch password, which is very funnily enough, and I'm going to break one of my few rules of this channel where I don't say the F-bomb, but it's engage Ridley motherfucker. That's the password. And what it does is that it loads you up, and in certain versions of the original Metroid, I should specify, very specific versions, it doesn't happen in all of them. It loads you up at the first screen of the game, only it's all glitched up looking, like all the sprites are screwed up. And there's some amount of Pac-Man Super Mario, just Mario Brothers syndrome rather, where if you go to the left of the screen, you pop in on the right. That's an entirely coincidental password name that it does that glitch, but I find that hilarious. It's at this point, by the way, in terms of gameplay, that I'm actually leaving Norfair to head back to Brinstar. I could feasibly go through the rest of Norfair right now, and I'd probably do decent enough, but I want the one major upgrade that's still in Brinstar alongside some ammo increases just to feel a bit more comfortable with the rest of Norfair, because Norfair is actually a pretty difficult area. In fact, I'd say it's where most of the game's difficulty comes from. So let's head back to the elevator room and head back on upstairs. Also, I'd like to note, despite being a game where the storyline brings up the space pirates in the manual, we actually don't see any space pirates in this game. Space pirates aren't seen until Super Metroid, which is odd. Mind you, it's like they probably designed the game first, wrote the story later. But, yeah, it's weird. Well, wrote the lore story, at least. They probably had the main idea of kick-ass bounty hunter hunts down things on alien planet, explore, go. Anyway, getting back to what's going on screen. As for our goal as to why we came back to Brinstar, the gold shaft that's in the room to our right, the one that's in the center of the area, there's one more door in that area we have yet to go through at the very top of the golden shaft. And going through there is really important for us because there's a technically optional ability in there that's pretty much the most helpful thing in the game. So we're gonna go do that. Though, honestly, I've talked about Zero Mission a few times now, but it's interesting coming back to Metroid 1 after so long, because Zero Mission was the first Metroid game I played, but I played the first one almost immediately afterwards. And to this day, I still find it interesting how for Zero Mission, they managed to keep a lot of the same stage design, albeit a bit remixed, and somehow make it all the more interesting. I can't tell if that's because of just the game's more in-depth mechanics, while still keeping the overall idea the same, or if it's because they just made the game better to control. Because control is a very instrumental part in a game, and Samus in Zero Mission just controls so goddamn well. Whereas here, she controls well, especially for an NES game, but Samus has a lot of weight in her compared to Zero Mission. Although I still think the lightest Samus has ever been in terms of control is probably Super, because she's uber floaty there. Heaviest is probably technically the Prime games, but in terms of, like, non-first person, more than likely Other M, actually. You know, for all the shit Other M gets as a story, and I will completely agree that that game's story is garbage, I still think the combat controlled well enough. In fact, I go back to Other M every now and then because I still actually enjoy it as a game. Story really was not good, though. Either way, through here is our new area, Brinstar, which has nothing new to it, really. That is actually kind of a hard thing to do about Metroid 1, though, is because the game is good, but compared to later entries in the series, it's also very bare. So talking about this game is actually a bit hard, especially when you've done Metroid as much as I have on this channel, and going to be doing over the next, say, month? Maybe 2 months, depending on when this gets uploaded. Because a lot of the ideas stay the same, but they get a lot more interesting. There's a lot more to talk about in later games. And that's the end of that topic, I think. I don't think there's anything else I could say about that right now. Other than we are coming up on the item. Now, you could potentially go and get this item earlier without having the high jump, which is the reason I came here now, because you need a high jump to get this, by doing what's known as a door jump. Basically, you shoot the door, you go into where the blue door would close on you, and then you do some weird button inputs. It's like down in the morph ball button at the same time, or jump in the morph ball button, I forget, to slowly jump up through the wall up to where that door is. However, that is a very easy trick to screw up, and if you screw it up too late, you're basically soft-locked in the wall. So I can't really do that. So let's instead go through here the real way to get to a new item for us. Fans of the series will recognize this item because it's would later become one of the most iconic traits about Samus's design, because people know the power suit, but they recognize this other suit a bit more. Not gonna lie though, when I first played Zero Mission and I heard this song, I was actually a bit creeped out. Especially, Zero Mission actually has one I still consider one of the coolest sound effects of all time, but also one of the creepiest. The hidden item theme, the unknown item theme. And here we get the Varia suit, which makes Samus look like she's either wearing some sort of pink morph suit or just running naked. However, Metroid 1 does not have something that later Metroid games, starting with Super, would have, and that's the high temperature rooms. That's because, in the case of Metroid 1 and 2, the Various Suit is purely a defense increase. We now take half damage, which is really helpful in this game's case because now enemies that originally did a third of your starting health of 30 will now only do about a fifth or sixth, which is really, really helpful. As to why the Various Suit doesn't have the shoulder pads yet, that's because Metroid 2 introduced that. I mentioned it back in that game's case, but because the Metroid 2 was originally released on the Game Boy, even though it was intended to be played more so with the Super Game Boy, they couldn't really have the Various Suit be a change of colors, so they added the shoulder pads to make it more distinctive. And then they just ran away from it from there on, making it the most iconic design in Metroid history. Although I did like the kind of middle ground that Other M did with the Various Suit, where it just changes the color, where she always has the shoulder pads. Mind you, I think Other M is just the best design Samus has had. Not because it accentuates her being a girl more so than anything else in the franchise, but just because it really makes her feel like she can do the acrobatic stuff she does in that suit. Because in the case of like the Prime games, the Power Suit is really bulky, or the Various Suit is really bulky. Either way, we got more missiles over there, but there's also, as you can see, another little pathway over here that I'm on. And we want to do a double bomb jump to get up to here because there's another energy tank. And as to where this hallway culminates, because it does end in another door instead of other passageways that end in just a dead end, you might remember the golden shaft that was on the right of Brinstar, the one that we were in when we got the bombs. It leads us back to there, so after I go through another door there, I'm actually going to be backtracking a pretty long distance into Brinstar, back towards where we started the game, because there's one energy tank in Brinstar we haven't gotten yet, and people who have played Super and Zero Mission know which one it is because it's probably one of the first items they saw purely on accident. In terms of the exact specifics, we're going to the room to the right of where we started, which is actually a very interesting room in my eyes from a game design standpoint because it's where the passageway you need the Morphball to go through is. And I've always found that room interesting because Metroid is one of the few games I can think of where you start off by going left. At least back in this era. Because, let's be honest, prior to this, and adventure games like Zelda aside, most side-scrollers, you only ever really went right. That's actually another thing I'll also give Adventure of Link, is that you go left pretty often. I like it when games kind of go against the norm like that, at least in terms of like genre specifics. Mind you, nowadays going against the norm is so common. It is almost the new norm. But that's just because gaming has evolved as a genre. But in terms of how I need to get this item, even with the high jump boots, I can't quite reach it. It's like just above where I need. So in this case, I'm actually bringing along a little Zoomer fan, a friend. Freeze him, shoot up, and grab the energy tank. And that's how you get that. And with that, I'm now done in Brinstar for a while. Potentially, I could head to one of the two boss areas at this point. However, there's still more items for us to grab in Norfair before I do so. I don't want to head into either of the two boss areas until I have basically every other item in the game. So we're heading back to Norfair, and in specific, we're going to be heading back to the right towards that purple shaft, because there's more items for us to grab, as I've stated. However, getting to those items is a bit interesting because we have to go through a little bomb passage wall. And it's actually in a very interesting location. You might remember the room where we got the high jump boots. There's a hidden passageway in there. So let's head on over there and see if we can find it. It's at this point in Zero Mission that you would actually need to go and get the Various Suit, though, because they made the area past where the high jump boots is a high temperature area. So that's a nice little way they try to blockade you, though. Zero Mission has so many speedrun locations, speedrun shortcuts that you can actually bypass it entirely and head to the first boss area before you even get the Various Suit. I don't recommend doing that, but I rarely ever speedrun that game, at least not using the quote-unquote casual route. After getting the Ripper 2 frozen and the Squeeped frozen, seriously, Squeeped is such a weird name, we can now access basically the other, I want to say, 2/3 of Norfair? Yeah, roughly, the other 2/3 of the other half. And it's because of this that Norfair ends up being the longest area because you have to go through a very long trek of rooms just to get a lot of items. There's no storyline purpose in doing this. In fact, it's entirely optional. But it's recommended because the bosses require enough missiles that you might as well. Oh, hey, rocks. However, it's, as you might notice, that we're actually getting a bit low on time. That's because, like I mentioned before, this was technically 2 recordings put together, and part 3, originally, at least what was originally going to be part 3, was actually one of the few parts that ended with me not on an elevator. So, we actually are going to have a bit more of an awkward ending coming up. Either way, welcome to the green bubble room, which I immediately know because I can go towards the top right of this, shoot up, and up here we're going to find our last actual upgrade. And it's a pretty important one, honestly, because otherwise some things are a bit annoying coming up. At least in terms of enemies, because it's just really powerful. It's also the last time I think we're ever going to hear this song. Yay? Question mark? In this upgrade room, we get the series staple, like a lot of weapons in this game, the screw attack. Now, when we jump, we turn into a spinning disc of energy, essentially. That's what that little flashing is. That does damage roughly equivalent to a missile and is just really helpful in some areas where platforming is a bit more tight. And you don't even have to be in the spin animation to do it. You usually have to, but it actually starts shortly before that. So if you have a low ceiling, you can actually jump and have like 1 or 2 frames of damage. But with that, I'm going to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we'll be getting the rest of the items in Norfair before heading off towards our first boss area. See you guys then.